Hello everyone and welcome to my video. Today I'm filming in the kitchen, so if there's some noises in the background, it might be my freezer or my refrigerator. So I just wanted to let you know that. And today's video is about what I think you should know as a first time pet owner of a hamster. And this list is just what I think you should know, so there might be other things that is important to know. I have owned quite a few hamsters, so I know what you should know when you get a hamster. So this is just what I think you should know before you get a hamster. I might not mention everything that I think you should know because there's a lot of things, but I'm gonna mention the most important things. So first of all, when you get a hamster, you should know that there's different species. About hamsters, you're not talking about breeds, you're talking about species. That's very important to know. And there's 5 species when it comes to hamsters, and all these species have different needs when it comes to food and other stuff. There's of course some basic stuff that kind of is the basic care for all hamsters, but when it comes to stuff like food and other things, you need to research the species that you're getting, because they're different and their needs is different because different species. So you just need to research the species that you're getting to know that you're giving them the right care and food and so on. There's 5 species of hamsters. There's the Campbell species, there's the winterwhite species, there's the Roborowski species, and there's the Chinese species, and of course there's also the Syrian. So 5 different species, and they all have different needs. So just research the species that you're getting and what their specific needs is.
And the Campbell and the winterwhite species can make a hybrid.
And hamsters are a pet that is often up late at night to early in the morning. In nature, they are crepuscular. And when they're domesticated, they're somewhere between being nocturnal and crepuscular. So that's also one of the reasons why a hamster isn't a great pet for a small child, because often the child may not even see the hamster because they're up so late.
So each hamster has their own time where they wake up, but mainly they're up late at night to early in the morning.
Of course, you can get a hamster that's up a lot of times during the day, but most hamsters are just up to get food and water during the day. So they're up quickly and then they go to bed again. So you don't see a lot of your hamster during the day when it comes to most hamsters. So you just have to know this. You have to know that it fits your schedule to have a pet that's up this late. And I would say you should only wake your hamster up if you need to check its health, if you need to see everything is alright. I don't really think you should wake up your hamster just to get it out and pet it and so on. I think you should only wake the hamster, 1, if it's an emergency, and 2, if you need to give it your daily healthcare check and see that everything's alright with your hamster. I think that you should always check your hamster every day, because when you have a small animal, they get easily sick.
Their sickness can easily turn into something that can become fatal for them.
You really have to check your hamster every day, because there could easily be something wrong with them. And when there's something wrong with them, it could easily go downhill and they could easily get very sick. So as soon as you see something abnormal about your hamster, you should take it to the vet straight away, because they are prey animals and they don't really always show signs that something is wrong with them. So just feel around your hamster, look at it at every angle, just so you know there's no lumps or bumps or nothing underneath looks weird, and just really have to give it a health check every day. That's what I think, because they get sick so easily and you can lose them so easily. So you just have to check them every day to make sure nothing is wrong with them. And I also think it's very important to mention that not every hamster gets tame. And you also have to be able to live with it, that you might get a hamster that might never become tame. You have to be alright with that, because you never know. And also it can take a long while for you to get them to be tame. It can take a couple of months, a half a year. So again, you have to be alright with this, because you never know what hamster you're gonna get, and if they're gonna get tame, or if they're gonna take a long while to get tame, or if they're gonna take a short while to get tame. You just have to be aware of that. that you might just have an animal that is fun to look at and might never get tame. So you just have to know that. And yeah, hamsters aren't really a cuddly pet most of the time. They're all over the place. So you also have to be alright with that. This is a really important one. Hamsters are solitary. In nature, they only come together to mate. And that means that if you have one hamster, you have one cage. If you have two hamsters, you have two cages, because one hamster should be in one cage and they should not live together at all, because they are solitary animals. So they only live one in their habitat. So one hamster per cage. The hamsters should not live together with any other hamsters. Something you also have to know is that they can be territorial. And they can be territorial around their cage. And that means they might attack you if you put your hand in the cage or if you move anything in the cage. When you have an animal like this, it's very important that you respect that they are territorial, because they are solitary animals and it's just natural for them to protect their territory. And some hamsters really get territorial. And you can still handle them, you just have to handle them another way. You just put something down in the cage, for example a cup, and have them crawl up in the cup and then take them out from there. So that's just also something you have to respect, that they might be territorial and you might not be able to put your hand in a cage with them because they're protecting their cage and thereby they're biting you. Just because they're territorial in the cage does not mean that they aren't sweet when you first have taken them up in something and out of the cage. You just have to respect that it's their cage, and then everything is actually gonna be fine. And when it comes to bathing your hamster, you shouldn't bathe them in water, because then they'll lose their natural protective oil layer in their skin. That isn't very good. You should only give your hamster a sand bath. So you should have a place where they could take a bath in sand, because that's how they bathe themselves. Especially the dwarf hamsters, they roll around in the sand. It's important to know that the sand you give them should not be dusty. They have a really sensitive respiratory system, so giving them any kind of dusty sand or bedding or anything like that just isn't good. You should really avoid that, because they could become sick if you give them something like that. And just as I said, you shouldn't give them any dusty bedding or sand, because they have a sensitive respiratory system, as I just said. The best bedding you can give them is paper-based. It could, for example, be boxer comfort or hemp, as long as it's not dusty. That's really the right way to go. And you can also give them toilet paper, as long as it's not scented in any way. You can just rip the toilet paper up and they can use that as bedding as well. And you should never use paper towels, because they absorb moisture, and if the hamster eats it and it absorbs moisture in the hamster's stomach, that really isn't good at all. So you should just give the hamster toilet paper, not any kind of paper towels. If you want to give them some extra bedding, of course. When it comes to the wheel, they actually have to have a big wheel. You should not give them any kind of wheel, any kind of wire or mesh, because it has to be a smooth surface that they're running on, so they do not get bumblefoot. I just saw a picture up here of the kind of wheel you're not supposed to get and the kind of wheel you are supposed to get. So a really good wheel I could recommend is the one that Trixie makes, which is the one I have just showed a picture of here. And that when you have a dwarf hamster, so a small species, you have to get a wheel that's 20 centimeters in diameter. And if you have a syrian, you have to get a wheel that's 28 centimeters in diameter. And as I've talked a little about before, the food that you're supposed to give your hamster really depends on what species they are, because they have different needs depending on the species. So you really have to research the species that you're getting and what kind of food you should give the species of hamster you have. I've made a video about what I feed my syrian hamster and what I feed my or I fed my winterwhite. He's no longer alive, sadly, but I'll just link that down below, so you can go watch that if you want to have syrian or winterwhite. And you're really not supposed to give hamsters lots of fresh vegetables because it isn't good for them. If they get a lot of it, they might easily get diarrhea, and that isn't good for them. So you should not give them too much fresh food or fresh vegetables in general. In the cage, it's really important that you actually get a big cage. I know there's a lot of myths about hamsters needing a really small cage like a critter trail, but that's like the worst cage you can give them. They actually have to get a lot of space in the cage. It has to be an uninterrupted floor space. So that means that you don't have tubes or anything linking two cages together. That you only have one bottom in your cage. And this bottom is in my country, and I'm gonna say it's different from country to country, so research what this is in your country. But in my country, if you have a cage for a dwarf hamster, the bottom of the cage needs to be 50 by 40 by 25 centimeters. And 50 is length, and 40 is width, and 25 is height of the cage. And when you have a Syrian, it's supposed to be 80 by 40 by 35, the cage. And that is again, 80 is the length, 40 is the width, and 35 is the height. And just in general, when you have a hamster, the bigger the better. And just remember, they have to have a uninterrupted floor space in the cage. So you can't just tube two cages together. They aren't really supposed to have a cage that's high or anything, or have different levels. So if you have different levels in a cage, that doesn't count either. It has to be the bottom of the cage that is these measurements that I just gave you. If you want to use the Danish measurements, of course, and these are just minimum measurements. That means that you may not, if you give your hamster anything that is smaller than the measurements I just gave you, that is considered inhumane. The hamster will not thrive really well if they get a cage that is smaller than this. So you have to get actually over these recommended minimum cage sizes that I just mentioned. Again, the bigger the better, so just give your hamster the biggest cage you can, and they will be so happy. I'll just link below some of the cages that I have a good experience with, and I also just mention them now. The Big Alex cage is really great for a Dwarfhamster. The Ferplast Duna is a really great cage for a Syrian, and the Ikea detolf can both be for a Syrian and a Dwarfhamster, of course. And you just have to remember, if you buy a Ikea detolf, you have to build a lid for the cage yourself, because hamsters are masters of escaping. So you always have to have a lid, always, no matter what. And also, it's just a good idea to not place their cage too high off of the ground, because if you do that and they escape somehow, there's a long way down. Just think of having the cage placed somewhere that isn't too far away from the floor, so they do not get hurt if they somehow escape, because they might. But just have a lid on your cage, that's the most important thing. When you have a hamster, I don't think everyone thinks of this actually, but when you have a hamster, you have to have a lot of enrichment for it, because they have a lot of energy. They're really pets with a lot of energy, and they need to get that burned out somehow. So it's really great if you have a lot of places that they can explore, different hideouts, a lot of bedding, just really make it interesting for the hamster, and have a lot of different food to spread around. Don't have a bowl for them, because they're gatherers. They will go around and gathering the food, and that is also one way that you can enrich your hamster. And as I've actually talked a lot about before, hamsters are really jumpy, or they can be really jumpy. So it's really important, again, as I said earlier, that you don't give a hamster to a small child, because they are up late, and you really have to know how to handle them, because they can really be jumpy and they have a lot of speed. So it's really important that you know how to handle them in the right way, so they don't jump or fall and get injured. As I've talked a little earlier about, they can also get really sick really quickly. Or they can get sick very quickly. So you just have to check on your hamster every day. Give them a health check every day. See that everything is alright for them every day. Even if you have to wake the hamster up. I think it's alright to wake the hamster up to give it a health check, because this is just so important. Do not get a hamster if it doesn't fit your schedule, because they are up late, and it's just best if you that fits in your schedule and you can be up late to interact with the hamster. So just when you give it a health check, just really feel your hamster. Also, another thing, when it comes to the weight of a hamster, it doesn't depend on the number on the scale. It depends on how your hamster feels. Does it feel really thin or does it feel very thick? For example, how easily can you feel its rib cage? That is one way you can go around. Is it too easy to feel, or can you really feel it? Just by doing that, you get an idea if your hamster is too fat or too thin, or just the way it should be. So that is what I recommend when it comes to their shape. And even when it comes to their bedding, I've talked earlier about what kind of bedding is great for them to have. But when you have bedding for them, it's really important that you have a deep amount of bedding for them, because they are diggers and they dig tunnels, and they have to have enough bedding for them to be able to dig tunnels. So it's around 14 to 15 centimeters of bedding at least. Give them as much bedding as you can. That's what I recommend, so they have a big area to dig in. Not every hamster will dig, but it's just best if they have the opportunity to do it. And if your hamster is not digging, it might just be that you have not given it enough bedding. Because if they have enough bedding, a lot of them will dig eventually. And as I talked a little before about where a cage should be placed, it should not be placed too far off the floor, and it
Hamster's cage should not be placed somewhere where it can get direct sunlight or where it can get drafts, so it should not be placed near a window or a door.
And then I want to talk about where to get a hamster from. This is a very, very important one. First of all, I want to say that you should look out for hybrids. There are hybrids when it comes to hamsters, and these are Campbells and winterwhite that have gotten a baby. And this is really problematic because the DNA of the hamster doesn't really match on the inside, so they can have a lot of problems with the temperament and also with diseases. So you should really, really avoid hybrids. It's really important if you want a Campbell or winter white hamster that you get a pedigree on them. So you can see that their ancestors are only Campbells or only a winter white, so you know you're not getting a hybrid, and then you know you're not supporting hybrids being bred. That's really, really important. And also, just in general, I would really recommend that you get it from a person that really knows a lot about hamsters. And again, I just think it's great to get a pedigree on the pet, just to know what the ancestors look like. And I just think this is, if the person you're getting from has a pedigree when you're buying it, it really shows how much the person knows about hamsters. So I really would recommend getting someone who, of course, can get your pedigree. But I know this isn't something you can do in every country. And if you can't get a pet from someone who is a breeder, really knows a lot about the hamsters, and give you a pedigree, I would definitely recommend saving hamsters. Of course, if you have the knowledge about hamsters, saving them or adopting them. But you really have to know about the pet before you adopt a pet or just save a pet in general, a hamster. For save a hamster, because it can be a lot more difficult if you get a hamster that you have adopted, because sometimes they've been through so much that it really takes a long time to get the trust. And if you don't know anything about hamsters, it might be a big handful to get a hamster that has some trauma with it, and you have to work a little more with than another hamster. And you also have to know more about hamsters, I would say, a lot of the time for saving a hamster, because you might not know if you're getting a difficult hamster. And I would definitely not recommend this as a first time hamster owner. I would recommend getting somewhere where you know the hamster doesn't have any bad history or trauma behind it. So yeah, that's just what I would recommend. And please don't buy pets from a pet store. They come from watermills most of the time, and they just haven't been treated right. They come from pet stores, and pet stores most of the time don't know what they're doing. So I would just, if you can, avoid pet stores at all costs. I just wouldn't support a pet store if I were you. I really recommend you look up how the pets in the pet stores are handled and where they come from, because then you'll really know why I'm saying don't get it from pet store. Really research where you're getting your pet from in general. Know that you're getting your pet from a good place. Or know as a first time hamster owner that you might be saving a hamster that isn't too difficult to care for. Of course, if you have owned multiple hamsters, you might know a lot about hamsters, and then I think it might be easier to get a hamster that you're saving for somewhere or adopting for somewhere that might have had a difficult past. But just don't make it any more difficult from you as a first time owner than it needs to be. So just research where you're getting your pet from. And that isn't too hard to take care of or gain trust when you're a first time hamster owner. That's just what I would recommend. Hamsters actually have their own personality. It's really funny how such a small pet can have such a big personality. So I would just say all around hamsters just really, really great pets. It's really important that you know that you're alright with having a pet that doesn't live for a long while. Because personally, I have found out that hamsters aren't the right pets for me, because I really get connected to my pets. And when you have a pet like a hamster that only lives around 1 to 2 years most of the time, and you really get connected to a pet, it might be too hard for you having a hamster, because you have to moan all the time because you're gonna lose hamsters really often because they don't live that long. And you really have to think about if hamsters are right pets for you when they don't live that long. I just want to say, you always have to put in the effort to get your hamster to trust. I think a lot of people just expect to get a pet that's just tame or where they have to do the minimal work. You always have to put the effort in when you get a pet, and when you get a hamster especially. It can really take a long time to get the trust, and you really have to put in the work. If you don't want to put in the work, then just don't get a hamster. And as I've just talked a little about before, hamsters often are not really cuddly animals. They're more fun and cute animals to watch. They are often all over the place. Yes, you might get a hamster that you can pet for a little while before they run off. And you might get a hamster that licks your finger or something. But in general, I wouldn't say that hamsters are a cuddly pet. They are more a fun and cute pet, but they are not a cuddly pet. You just have to know that before you get them. There's a big chance you might get a hamster that isn't cuddly, because most of them really aren't. And they don't sit still for very long, just so you know it. Just so you're prepared for it, that hamsters are kind of the pet that are all over the place anyway. You really have to watch them all the time. And hamsters can actually talk, and it really depends on the hamster how much they talk and how much they vocalize. But they can talk, so just so you don't get scared if they are talking to you. It doesn't mean that they're sick. Hamsters can actually talk. And it really depends on the hamster how much they talk to you. But just don't get scared if they're talking to you. There's a big difference between them talking to you and them having respiratory problems. And the more you learn about your hamster, the more you're gonna see the differences between these two. Of course, you have to know how it sounds when they have respiratory issues, but I think you're gonna know when you have the hamster, because it's gonna sound abnormal when they have respiratory issues. I think you're easily gonna be able to hear if something is wrong with them, in that sense. But yeah, they can talk, so don't get scared if your hamster talks to you. And just a fun fact to end the video. They have cheek pouches where they store all food before they get to the food storage that they have somewhere in the cage. And actually, the cheek pouches goes all the way down to their hips, so you don't have to get scared if they can really get a huge amount of food in them. They're not choking or anything. They know what they're doing. They have huge cheek pouches to carry food in. So yeah, that was kind of a long video, but I also think there's a lot of important things that you need to know as a first-time hamster owner. And there are a lot of myths when it comes to a pet like a hamster, so you really have to stay aware of what's right and what's wrong when it comes to hamster care. And of course you also have to use your own logic to find out what makes sense and what doesn't. But anyways, I really hope
that you learned something
about hamsters and hamster care and learned about if hamsters are a right pet for you, and if they aren't. If they are, please go out there, research some more and research what species of hamster would be the right one for you, because there are 5. You definitely have something to choose from. Personally, from my experience, I think Syrians and winterwhites are lovely, but I haven't had any other species for hamster, so of course I can't talk for the other species. But anyways, thank you so much for watching, and I hope you have a lovely rest of your day, and thank you for watching, and see you soon.
Thank you for watching, and remember to like and subscribe and turn on notifications.